Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists, esteemed participants, good afternoon and welcome to this panel discussion on responding to the needs of informal sector workers. My name is Markus Ruck. I'm the Social Protection Specialist of the ILO Decent Work Technical Support Team for East and Southeast Asia and the Pacific. I'm honored to serve as your moderator for this session. Ladies and gentlemen, informal employment dominates work in Asia and the Pacific. Even though the region has the highest employment to population ratio globally, more than 2/3 of all workers, or 1.3 billion people, engage in informal employment. Informal employment, as you know, refers to work that is in law or in practice not covered or insufficiently covered by formal arrangements. Typically, the jobs are associated with serious decent work deficits. Informal workers often perform low-paid and unskilled jobs and by definition are not contributing to social protection schemes. They are often self-employed or working in micro-enterprises, which together account for more than 80% of all employment in the region. While important national and sub-regional differences exist, informal employment prevails in both agricultural and non-agricultural sectors, such as construction, wholesale and retail trade, accommodation, and restaurants. Women in the informal economy are often engaged in more vulnerable jobs, as domestic workers, home-based workers, or contributing family workers. The emergence of new forms of work is also contributing to informality. Digitization has enabled the expansion of the gig economy, mediated through online platforms such as online taxi companies or crowdwork platforms. The conditions for workers in these new and quickly growing jobs are difficult to monitor. In cases in which no mechanisms are in place to formalize the sector, their work conditions tend to mimic the situation of informal sector workers. Levels of informal employment show no sign of abating. Unless concerted policy efforts are made to promote formalization, informal jobs risk prevailing in labor markets in the region for the coming decade. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have the privilege of hearing from a distinguished panel of experts who will share with us their insights, experiences, and recommendations regarding the topic we are here to discuss. First, we have Mr. Benjo Santos Benavides, Undersecretary Workers' Welfare and Protection Cluster, Department of Labor and Employment, Republic of the Philippines. The second panelist is Ms. Mizuo Okimoto Kwatatip, Regional Team Leader, Inclusive Growth and Prosperity Advisor, Bangkok Regional Hub, UNDP. And our third panelist is Ms. Aura Sevilla, Focal Person for Southeast Asia and Older Workers at WIGO, Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing. In our conversation today, we will explore a wide range of critical questions. For example, how can governments and policymakers effectively engage with and support informal economy workers to improve their livelihoods and social well-being? What innovative approaches and best practices have been successful in providing social protection and financial inclusion for this segment of the population? How can technologies be harnessed to empower informal workers with access to financial services and social protection programs? And what can we learn from the experiences of other regions and countries that have successfully addressed the challenges of the informal economy? We will also delve into the gender dimensions of informality, acknowledging that women often face unique challenges within this sector. As we navigate these topics today, let us keep in mind that the ultimate goal is to identify practical solutions and policy recommendations that can positively impact the lives of millions of informal economy workers across our region. We will have 2 rounds of questions addressed to the panelists, after which we will have a question and answer session where we will open the floor to comments and questions from the audience. I encourage all our esteemed panelists and participants to share their insights, experiences, and ideas freely. Let's engage in a constructive and informative dialogue that can help shape policies and actions to respond more effectively to the needs of those who often labor in the shadows of our formal economy. Thank you for being part of this important conversation. And without further ado, let's delve into the first round of questions. Well, as we explore solutions today, I think it is invaluable to understand how different countries approach the challenges of developing and enhancing social protection schemes for informal sector workers. To shed light on the Philippine experience, I would like to turn to Mr. Benavides, who brings a wealth of knowledge on the initiatives and measures taken by the Philippines in recent years. Mr. Benavides, could you please share with us the key developments and the process behind the creation and enhancement of social protection schemes for informal sector workers in the Philippines?
Thank you, Marcos, for that question. But before I respond, let me first greet everyone. Isang kaaya-ayang hapon sa inyong lahat. A pleasant afternoon to all. I would like to respond to the question by telling you first a story. And I came in before 1 o'clock. At the gate, we asked the officer where could we park my service vehicle. But I was told that there's no available parking inside. So we decided to find a parking space outside. While looking for a parking space outside, I saw a man. And this man was selling a bottled mineral water. I asked him, saan kami pwedeng mag-park? I asked him, where could we park our vehicle? Then he replied, doon po sa dulo, then take kanan po kayo, you will find one. Then while negotiating the avenue, the rain poured, heavy rain. Instead of having my car parked in that parking space, we decided, I asked my driver to just drop me, go back to ADB, then drop me, then decided just to wait for this session. I just realized that that man is just one of the millions of informal sector workers in the country. I'm taking to be a panelist of this session, responding to the needs of the informal sector and workers. And yet, in that instance, that man, an informal sector worker, responded to my needs. So I would like to respond to the question, having in mind that it's not just about us responding to the needs or government responding to the needs of the informal sector workers. At times, they do respond to our needs. That's why it's very important that social protection programs of any country, the Philippines, like the Philippines, should be enhanced and strengthened. For in for the Philippine experience under this administration, or even during that last administration, we tried and continue to enhance and strengthen our social protection programs for the informal sector workers. But how do we do that? We want to develop a universal, integrated, and inclusive social protection program by one, mitigating risk. I'm referring to mitigating life cycle risk, either because of health or of natural or human induced calamity. We need to manage economic shocks. And also, in developing or enhancing social protection program, we should be able to address governance risk. So, during the span of the last two administration, and by the way, last April, the President of the Philippines just approved the social protection floor. We started crafting this scheme or social protection floor since the time of the previous two presidents. That was in 2014. We started the consultation in 2014, and we're glad that we were recipient of funding support, not only from ADB, but also from ILO, in the conduct of consultations. So we have a very massive consultation, not only at the national level, but also at the ground, at the regional level. So part of that consultation is to address barriers. Because I think, and we think, that barriers to access to social protection program will make our informal sector workers poor or even poorer because they cannot access programs due to legal barriers. So how do we do that? Let me cite a particular example in 2019. In the Philippines, we have what we so called the Employees Compensation Program. We cover work-related injury and illnesses. We compensate the workers. But prior to that year, 2019, that program only covered workers in the formal sector. In 2019, we removed some legal barriers, and the commission issued the Employees Compensation Commission, uh, promulgated a resolution to cover workers in the informal economy who are, although there are still some limitation, members of the social security system. So in short, for purposes of compensating workers, whether you're employed in the informal or formal economy, if the injury or illness is work-related, the Philippine government, the Department of Labor and Employment, the Employees Compensation Commission covers the compensation. So that's one aspect how, in concrete terms, how the Philippines enhance its social protection program. And by the way, because of the varying level of risk and the prevalence of poverty in specific sector, for one, in the agriculture, the implementation of social protection program in the country is spread among several departments of government. I checked the program in other session. You also invited the DSWD, maybe that the panel, the panelists talk about the 4Ps, the Pantawid Pamilya Pilip. It's one of the social protection scheme or program in the country managed by the Department of Social Welfare and Development. But let me go back to the social protection program that is managed by the Department of Labor and Employment. That's one I mentioned on social insurance. We also have, of course, labor market intervention. But I also checked the program. There's a session on labor market intervention. But in passing, let me share to this group that we also take care of all workers, regardless of whether that worker is hired or employed under the formal or informal arrangement. Because our labor market information and programs are actually for all workers, regardless of the formal or informal arrangement. I recall during the pandemic, we also implemented the adjustment measure program that is meant to cover uh, all workers, including the workers in the under informal employment. We even prioritize the small, the micro enterprises. These are the these are the economic units. Too small of them, just hiring not less than 9 employees. We prioritize the cash assistance given to them. So during the pandemic, we extended financial assistance to workers and we prioritize workers of micro enterprises. There was a point of that it was very difficult to implement the assistance. And that is one of the challenges that we encounter. One of the challenges is that the identification of the informal sector workers. Who are they and where are they? Once you identify their identity and their location, the next challenge that we encounter, how, how are we going to extend the assistance? And there, we make use of, uh, the pandemic actually taught us that we need to exploit technology and digital solution. So we extend the financial assistance using digital solutions. We remove administrative barriers, administrative procedures. We don't even require them to apply. We just give them, we got the list, and we provide the assistance. I would like also to share, as part of our enhancement of our social protection program managed by the Department of Labor and Employment. You must have heard of the emergency employment, or to many in the regions, this is the tupad. This is an emergency employment given to informal sector workers who are maybe suffering from or affected by calamities, either natural calamities or human-induced disaster. Uh, I think the Mayon is uh, showing signals of another eruption. The Taal recently was showing signs. We cover fisher folks, we cover vendors, we cover other informal sector workers in those areas. We ask them to work in evacuation centers, and we pay them the highest regional minimum wage in that region. So yes, they lost income because of the eruption, but we want to somehow replace that income lost of our uh, informal sector workers. Uh, there's also one reform that we implemented or reintroduced under this administration. To many workers under an informal arrangement are not covered by our labor laws. In the Philippines, we cover them. There is just a challenge as to enforcement. Uh, Not only because we have limited number of inspectors, but we have limited budget. But we address that challenge by uh, overhauling the way we enforce labor laws to micro enterprises. We no longer inspect micro enterprises in the country. Instead, we visit them and provide technical assistance visit. We don't use the police power of the state for these micro enterprises to comply with standards. Instead, we enable them to comply with the standard. How do we do that? We invite them to orientation, seminars, and capacity building training to build their capacity to comply. We are mindful that this sector, the micro enterprises, were the most affected during the pandemic, and we are on the stage of recovery. While the best way for them to recover is for government to help them. So, uh, in short, in our enhancement or strengthening of our social protection program in the country is based on the view that we need to have a universal, integrated, and inclusive social protection program. There are pending bills, and we are supporting that, especially for the gig economy, the gig world, the freelancers. They form part of the informal sectors. They are not, or they are not covered by formal arrangement, or they are insufficiently covered by formal arrangement. Some of their clients are even outside the jurisdiction of the Philippines, but they do produce economic work of economic value. So we need to protect them. And protection comes in the form of laws passed by Congress, in the forms of department orders issued by the Department of Labor and Employment. But the most important thing is to implement laws and department orders, implementation of a universal, integrated, and inclusive social protection program. So I hope I was able to respond to that question. And I would like to go back to the story of that man selling bottled mineral waters. Let us not just think of responding to their needs, because at times they do respond to our needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benavides. This was a very interesting intervention you made, and thank you also for giving a face to informal sector workers. You know that we not only talk about them in a very abstract way, and what stood out for me is that you actually turn inspections of micro enterprises into technical assistance visitations to build their capacity to comply with the existing laws and regulations. Thank you again very much. And I'd like now to come to our second question. One of the most exciting aspects of our discussion today is the opportunity to learn from successful initiatives that have already made a significant impact in our region. To help us explore these innovative approaches and best practices, I would like to invite Mizuo to kindly share with us some of the standout approaches and best or good practices that have proven successful in extending vital support to the crucial segment of the population of this workforce.
Thank you, Marcus, for the question. And I think, is it on? Can you hear me? Yeah, maybe I have to hold it this way. Better now. Can you hear me? Sorry. Okay. So thank you so much, Marcus, for the question. It's a pleasure to be in this distinguished panel. And I think the question also touched upon some of the financial inclusion aspects within the informal sector worker. I just wanted to maybe start off by referring to the example of India's universal digital ID system that registered more than 1.2 billion people, which is about 90% of India's population. And these are also linked to the bank account system. And why I want to bring out this experience is because as Excellency Benavides also pointed out, it's about understanding where the informal sector workers are, who are they, and I think digitalization and having this unified ID system is so crucial for having the record of the entire population that covers also the informal sector workers. And in the way that also to consider that informal sector is very in a state of flux. People move in and out of different jobs and are very elusive. So I think this sort of inclusive and integrated record on ID system is really crucial. And we have in UNDP, the country office in India has done a socioeconomic impact analysis of the Safai Satis, who are the waste pickers and the street sweepers. Interestingly, the analysis found that this ID card was owned widely by the Safai Satis. So basically, these are informal sector workers, usually very disadvantaged women. And therefore very difficult to usually cover through the registration system. But the analysis did confirm that they owned this ID system and that they were it was easier or quickly the local authorities were able to identify the insecurities of these informal sector workers and identify the needs and therefore inform the timely response. So this is from our own study. I think the India case also shows that the interoperability of the universal digital system is really crucial because it enabled access to multiple opportunities such as digital payments, fintech firms, but also digital wallets, and use very simple technology such as debit cards and phones. And we had done actually another study in the India country office, a longitudinal study about migrant workers across India. And that also study confirmed the receipt of digital payments during the lockdown. And it was done in a very systematic and timely manner. So again, the importance of universal system, but also that is linked to interoperability. I think that also the India case brings up very interesting lessons around the financial inclusion by addressing the twin objectives of growth and also poverty reduction, because it sustained the income security also in the rural areas. So if you have bank accounts in a resident in the urban area, but also in the rural area, if you have those bank accounts, or digital wallet, you can make the transfer between the two locations. So if one is under the weather, the other can support. Therefore, you'd be able to prevent poverty reduction on one side. Also helps the sales of MSME in the informal economy, and these are actually entities largely in the informal economy. So it does help the growth or sustain the economic activities among the MSMEs as well. We also understand that the account holders are more likely to also use financial services and therefore, for example, to expand business, if they can, invest in education and health, and also to manage these risks and also weather the different shocks. And in the study that we did with the Safai Satis that I mentioned, we also found that these waste pickers or street sweepers was able to access social protection schemes, but also invest in education among children, but also, and these also studies made very important recommendations around removing these bottlenecks or barriers to accessing these services as well as social protection schemes. So, UNDP was not directly supporting these ID system, but our analysis have really provided very vital evidence around this the value of a universal integrated system covering the informal sector workers. But, and I think what we also need to keep in mind is that in every country, and this is not limited again to India, but there are segments of populations that are left behind. Because informal sectors are neither ultra poor, targeted by the social protection for the vulnerable people, nor by the formal social security system. And here, UNDP supports a number of promising initiatives in the Asia-Pacific region, precisely to address this last mile, concerning particularly the financial inclusion of the informal sectors and looking at also the gender dimension. For example, in Nepal, we partnered with, and we're still partnering with UN Women to jointly support the delivery of unconditional cash transfers in the form of emergency cash transfers to the vulnerable women. And this does also involve opening bank accounts, enabling women to be to financially be included, and also that helps legal access and also access health insurance premiums. So from our project data, we know that more than 60% of vulnerable women were able to access livelihood opportunities, and also a large number of them were able to enroll their children to schools and also sustain income security. So this last mile is very important. Also in the Philippines, we also partnered with the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region to co-develop an information management system that includes informal sector workers and register them in the social protection database, and that allow them to access employment and other social benefits. So these are some of the examples that we also support through our projects. And so it's looking at the bigger system, but also addressing the last mile, I think, are very crucial to ensure that really the marginalized people and have the access to financial inclusion. These are largely also informal sector workers. Yeah, thank you.
Misu, thank you very much for this very insightful presentation, making the case for India. And in a previous work, I also spent some time in India, and India is indeed a laboratory where all kinds of innovative approaches are explored and implemented. For example, I also remember there is this Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Act of 1996 and the corresponding Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Cess Act, which stipulates that if someone wants to build a house or something, he has to pay between 1% and 2% cess or levy of the overall construction costs, which goes into a welfare fund in various states. This is very successfully done in Kerala, for example. So it varies, I mean, the success of implementation, but it is seen as a very interesting case. There is also the RSBY Smart Card for extension of health protection to workers, informal, basically workers below the poverty line, BPL workers, and that means that those people who are eligible get a smart card, and through the card they are eligible for to draw 30,000, maximum 30,000 rupees for hospitalization-related expenditures. That card can also be split between the family and the male breadwinner, for example, who goes around to find jobs in other states, in neighboring states, faraway states, because a lot of these workers are migratory in nature. You know, it's very interesting because they keep the characteristics of the informal workers in mind. You know, it's a lot of them are illiterate, so it has to be paperless. People cannot read. They are poor, so they cannot be asked to pay first and be reimbursed later. So it is cashless. So it is very, and it can be split. So because many of these workers are migratory, migrant workers. So I think it's very interesting. Thank you very much for adding more examples to what's going on in India and also in Nepal, for that matter. So I would like now to turn to our third question addressed to Aura. As we explore the multi-faceted world of the informal economy, sorry. One of the distinct challenges faced by informal sector workers is their limited collective bargaining power due to the often fragmented nature of their work. Aura, could you please share your insights on how governments and social partners can bridge this gap and effectively engage with and support informal economy workers, ultimately enhancing their livelihoods and social well-being.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcos, for that good question. No? And this is a very valid questions that we have been discussing since the first day of the session. But since we're on the last day of the session, and I know you're a bit tired already, and you might want another set of story. So I like sharing story as well. So there was a very recent event that Wigo was invited as a resource speaker. And this event is about how to design pension for the self-employed. So we're glad to accept the invitation, but then we look into the list of participants. It's a very long list of participants. But guess what? Who are the participants? Who are the participants, do you think? None of them are self-employed. So we talk about designing self-employed. We're talking about extension of pensions for the self-employed. But the forum do not have any self-employed present in the discussion. This is just a sample of how we deal every day or in our work, how social dialogue is always limited to the main stake, to policymakers, to development agencies, but none from the sectors that we really want to extend the program to. So why is this? No, what are the reasons why we think informal workers are missing in key spaces for social dialogue? So we don't have an exact evidence on this, but we have some anecdotal evidences also from a recent consultation workshop we held in Bangkok. And these are some of the three things that we found out. One, which is mentioned already by Laura this morning, informal workers are de facto included, de jure excluded in institutionalized national social dialogue mechanisms such as the tripartism. So why is this? There are two reasons for that. One, their occupations or their type of work is not recognized by the labor law, meaning they cannot organize, as they do not have rights to organize as workers. One sample of this are domestic workers, which are predominantly women-led sector. In many countries in the region, domestic work is still not recognized as work. So one example is Thailand. So and given that it's so hard for the domestic workers to also to organize. Another reason is that also the laws, for example, for occupations that are including self-employed, they are also not recognized by law to also organize. So one sample of this are subcontracted self-employed, subcontracted home workers. So these are workers that are hired by company, but then they have to do the work at their homes. So they are being paid per piece or per by specific product or produce that they do. So there is no clear relationship, employee-employer relationships there. So these are the sectors that also hard to organize. And we know we've heard about gig economy, which is also very difficult also to organize. So another reason for why it's also missing in the traditional or institutionalized social dialogue mechanisms is that there are also some resistance coming from traditional social actors. Who are the other traditional actors we have? We have the employers, and we also have the trade unions or the employers. The workers' organization. There are still many trade unions in the region, and this is what they said during our consultation workshop. Their rules are still not, internal rules are still not accepting memberships from informal workers. Their membership are still the formal workers. So while there are some good samples while it's extended, one problem we have is that women also do not get a position in the decision-making structures of the trade unions. And as a result, most of the issues of women are also not taken by the trade unions, and especially, like also most trade unions are mostly men. Excuse me to our gentlemen here, but it happens that their voices also, particularly of women, are not taken by, even they are members of this trade union. So there's also gender issues there. And another also problem or limitations is that are also formal workers um, can represent informal workers, because particularly the self-employed. We have this one woman she's a street vendor from India, and then she tells like, how can formal workers talk about my situation, me as a street vendor? When also their problems is, for example, evictions from policies, which also coming from the government. So you have this kind of issues like the representation that also like limiting in the traditional institutionalized system. So in the beginning, when we started participating in international labor conferences, there was also a question where do self-employed be better represented? Is it the workers' organization or is it employers' organization? WIGO stands that there should be in workers' organization because their investment is on their labor. They don't have investment in capital. So that's the main difference. That's why the risk and also their exposures and also autonomy, they don't have that. So that's why it's very important that they be represented in workers' organization. So how do we can be creatively work around this? So we know there are also some good practices also as well in this region, and I would like just to highlight some. One, I think it's very important that the region should ratify ILO recommendations 204. We know many countries in the regions has already ratified the collective bargaining and also the rights to organize. But the 204 have specific recommendations on how also an explicit mentions about workers in the informal economy. Secondly, is that we also think that this is very important. We have to recognize informal workers as workers. In the case, for example, of self-employed SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association in India, it's the first trade union of self-employed with 2.3 million members. So they were able to form themselves as trade unions so they can collectively bargain and also push for their own rights, because who can better push for their own rights but themselves? So another is that recommendations that we see or some solutions that we're seeing in the region is that there should be an inclusive and more broadly representation in the tripartite system. And what do we mean by that? So it's not just, so we need to put something more specific that allows members or workers from the informal economy to participate in this tripartite system. So we have some, for example, one samples of this is the government of the Philippines, wherein when the domestic workers law was passed, it created an institutionalized mechanisms for domestic workers to also have a seat on the table. They were able to negotiate because it's institutionalized in the framework. So we can make this our institutional framework to also be inclusive to workers, particularly those dominated by women. And another is that outside the traditional tripartite system, we can see in the region movements of grassroots mobilizations and organizing, like in the instance of Thailand, wherein based on the Home Workers Act, there is a representation of informal workers in the health board, where they have a seat and they also have a voice in designing the policy. And lastly, we see a lot of importance of allyship, like the importance of being part, like workers from formal economy and informal economy also working together. We also see now new mechanisms like tripartite plus. So, and while these kind of mechanisms are good as well at the national levels, one problem with this kind of mechanisms is they're not sustainable because they're not institutionalized in laws. So they are a good way that can bring up the voice of informal workers, but the problem is it's not institutionalized. So we also see a lot of grassroots work which is more effective at the local levels. There's a lot of informal workers group who are doing a lot of advocacy and at the local government. So let me just take this opportunity to share that WIGA, in collaboration with the ASEAN Senior Labor Officials Meeting, or SLOM, we will be conducting a study on the status of social dialogue in social protection in Southeast Asia. I mean, we see this as an important step to understand the landscape of social dialogue in the region, and also the possibilities, limitations, and some opportunities that we have. And we see this as an important steps as well from the government in bridging the gap, in making sure that the voice of the majority of the workers are being taken in these spaces. So I think that's...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aura, for shedding light on the challenges we are facing to give representation and voice to informal workers, and also identifying some possible pathways forward. You know, you gave some examples again from India. Seva is, I think, probably a case in point. So I thank you very much for this. Let's start now our second round of questions, starting with Mr. Benavides. You already alluded to the transformative potential of technology in the answer to the first question. Now, given your expertise in the field, could you please share your insights on how technology and digital solutions can be effectively harnessed to reach and empower informal sector workers with essential financial services and social protection programs?
Thank you again, Marcos, for that question. But I will be responding that question not by means of a story, this time by means of examples. Example in the past, recent past, and examples at present. So one example that I think worth of mentioning is the cash transfers that we extended during the pandemic, not only for the Department of Labor and Employment, but also with respect to other agencies. We extended financial assistance through the Department of Finance, DSWD, the Department of Agriculture, the Land Transportation and Franchising Board. We did extend financial assistance through digital solution, through technology. Application was made online. Processing was made through the use of technology and computers. I'm thinking if indeed computers are more intelligent than humans. We paid the cash assistance through digital solution. And up to this date, we continue to do or to exploit technology and digital solution, particularly in our program. We continue to pay the wages of our beneficiaries under one of our programs, that's the TUPAD, through digital solutions. So payout in cash is more of an exception. We make use of bank transfers. We make use of money remittance center in the past, in the recent past, and up to this date. We did that for one particular program, but we also did that in other programs. In the payment of adjustment measure program during the pandemic, we still have fund for that, but we're not ready yet to pay workers of financial assistance due to Nipah virus. We're reserving that because we expect dislocation or displacement due to artificial intelligence. We're preparing for that. And we understand that there are jobs that will become obsolete and workers will be affected. We want to capture these workers and get them paid. So that's just for the Department of Labor and Employment. In other agencies, such as the DSWD, months ago, we launched or we piloted the food stamp program. And indeed, technology and digital solution was used to pay the beneficiaries. they actually get that stamp and they make use of that stamp to buy goods. So I think ADB was part of this food stamp program of the DSWD. And the SSS, I happen to sit in the board of the Social Security System. We continue to make use or to take advantage of technology and digital solution in the application of Social Security benefit. From, from claims or application for maternity benefit, disability benefit, sickness benefit, retirement, unemployment benefits. We do that with the use of technology. And we do that also in extending health benefits under the universal health care. So I understand that in one of the session, you also invited PhilHealth. Unfortunately, PhilHealth was attacked recently. That is one problem we encounter, especially if we have a technology or we're making of technology and we're not that protective of the data collected or stored from our beneficiaries and clients. But overall, we're harnessing technology and digital solution by continuously making use of these advances in technology. We continue to do this because it's more secured. It's more efficient. We became and we continue to be more efficient by doing our processes through technology and digital solution. We also reduce duplication of assistance received by beneficiaries. Through the use of technology and digital solution, we were able to identify multiple or duplicate claimants. We were also able to reduce administrative cost. It is more costly to hire people to process claims rather than let the computer do the processing. So that's why under our ISSP, we will continue to harness the technology and digital solution. But the catch is we need to protect the data and collected and stored against cyber attacks. In the Philippines, we have a law on data privacy. Anyone who just make use without the collected data or the stored data without the consent of the source may get jailed or imprisoned. And the other thing that to us is a challenge is the digital divide. Part of the regions are still lacking sufficient IT infrastructure. In some part of the region, internet connection is not yet reliable. And to the informal sector workers, some of them don't even have devices, or even they do have these devices, they have limitation as to access with respect to internet connection. So we continue to improve our programs through digital solution, but this should be coupled with infrastructure development, especially in the countryside, so that we put more connectivity so that the informal sector workers will have more access to social protection programs, available social protection program. Again, we learned this from the pandemic. When every inch or amount of human faculty drains, technology and digital solution build us out. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benavides, for your insights on how technology and digital solutions can really empower and reach and empower informal sector workers. I would like now to turn to Mizuho for our next question. One of the most pressing issues we face today is the need for adaptable and resilient social protection policies, particularly in light of the dynamic economic landscape and unexpected crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. Ms. Yo, could you kindly share with us your insights on how social protection policies can be effectively adapted to meet the evolving needs of informal economy workers, especially during times of crisis such as the recent pandemic?
Okay. Thank you for the question, Marcus. Yeah, I think it's been a theme of also this Social Protection Week, but I think one of the important challenges that we need to recognize is this fiscal constraints, and cash transfers are important, but there are fiscal constraints that we need to consider, and therefore making social protection truly transformative and making sure that they address the twin objectives of productivity and protection is really crucially important for the informal sector workers. So the objective of, just not lifting people out of poverty, but more of a transformative agenda that enhances long-term resilience is, I think, really the goal that we need to work towards. And I think some of our the work that we support in the countries in this region, for example, in Cambodia, we support the pilot graduation-based social protection program that builds on the ID poor system. Again, very poor families to make sure that they are supported by cash assistance, but that's not the end of it. But they actually, the objective is really to improve productivity and ensure they have access to livelihoods, assets that build long-term resilience. And I think this is really a very important case for making sure that, again, what we discussed about the integrated social protection that links cash transfer, but also active labor policies and also livelihood solutions. And we're really glad to see that the government of Cambodia is prioritizing social protection overall in the new pentagonal strategy, but to also consider institutionalizing this kind of scheme as part of their national program. So, we can demonstrate, but I think the scaling up the government system will have very important implications on the informal sector workers scale. And secondly, that again, we have also discussed about this transition to green and low carbon economies, and we tend to think of one of the challenges. Yes, it is about challenges, but also about opportunities, particularly around improving the quality of jobs and opportunities across different population groups. And this is where I think we need to understand the implications of transition on the nature of jobs, but also how the different segments of population will be impacted. Again, further research need to be done, but I think in several references we see, for example, globally the jobs in the energy sector could grow up to 122 million by 2015. But at the same time, in other references, we see, for example, women working in full-time position in solar industries about 40%. And they're also employed more in administrative jobs rather than, technical positions or managerial, scientific jobs in these sectors. So this is something that we need to understand further, the intricacies of what this transition means to the different population groups and the informality in particular. So I think, it will, so this implications on the informal sector is really crucial to understand. And there's certainly good experiences that have been discussed in this week, lots of lessons learned from Europe, Germany, Spain, Canada, for example, around also the closure of coal mines and how countries dealt with that reskilling, upskilling, and re-employment of the affected workers. And there are also other examples in this region. And I'll turn over to maybe about the need also for addressing the fiscal space, which was also in Shara's presentation this morning. Yes. to weather the shocks immediately, we still do need the cash transfer. So yes, the integration and this labor market interventions and also long-term resilience is really crucially important. But when countries need to pick up on this cash transfers at a scale, I mean, talking about not just really the poorest, but the informal sector, which is a large part of the population in many of these countries in the region, we need to have a fiscal space. And this is really a concern. And we have been looking at this issue very carefully also in UNDP, and especially from the macroeconomic policy angle. And our research shows that 13 countries in the region spend more than 10% of the government revenue just to pay the interest. I think it was also perhaps also the similar reference that was also in Shara's presentation this morning, but I think to contextualize it into the Asia-Pacific region, that is quite a number of countries, and the level of pressure that it is on the expenditure side is greater, because consider that in 2019 there was only 8 countries, so now we have 13 countries experiencing this pressure. And we also know from our research that low and lower middle income countries are spending more interest rates than health and education, as well as social protection. So it's also about the typologies of the countries where, particularly these spending issues are under pressure. So here we turn to, good examples from the countries in this region, and Indonesia is often quoted as a country that's been able to kind of redirect fossil fuel subsidies to reallocate, a scale of 15 billion to dollars to broader development goals, such as increasing investments in education, social protection, but also food security programs. But I think there's much more that we need to learn about this, and how governments actually anticipate this structural transformation, the impact on labor market interventions, and what are the policies that could be built upon, adapted, but also new. We need to now make sure that the policies actually address the long-term risks and the challenges. So I think there's a lot to learn further from the experiences in this region. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wu, for your very interesting and informative intervention. In the interest of time, I would like to go straight to our last session, our last question in this session, which is addressed to Aura. As we explore the multifaceted world of the informal economy, it's essential that you delve into the specific gender-related challenges that often go hand in hand with this sector. Aura, could you kindly share with us your experience on the gender-related challenges within the informal economy, and illuminate us on the strategies that can be adopted to ensure gender-responsive policies and interventions?
Yes, thank you, Marcus. This is a very important question because, like in the region, women are overrepresented in vulnerable forms of employment, and they also do not have any form of protection. I just would like to highlight 3 points here, because we know that men and women also face different life risks, vulnerabilities, and eventually women would need maternity and childcare, and because of women live longer, we're quite blessed. We live longer, and then that means we also need protection as well. So there are just 3 things that I'd like to highlight. So maternity, many women in informal employment has either to work until the last day before they deliver, and then they also prematurely needs to go back to work because they don't have any maternity protection. In the region, there are only 9 countries that provides maternity protection, and these are not universal. And also another problems that we see is that there are, in instances of conditional cash transfers, there are some soft conditions that also perpetuates even gender inequality, wherein women are supposed to attend certain sessions that would also kill or lose opportunity for them to earn an income because they have to attend, they're required to attend these sessions. Another thing I'd like to bring up is the issue on childcare. In the region, women also spend more than 30% on unpaid care on top of the paid work that they do, and they are also 4 times more likely to do unpaid care work than men. We know, like for example, street vendors. In the streets, they have to carry their kid while they are doing work, and it's very dangerous because you carry these kids on the streets and they're exposed to different kind of toxins, and also that happens as well when you also do your work at home because there's no compartmentalization. You work, this is your eating place, this is also the place you work. So it exposes the child to different kinds of risks. And the last thing I'd like to highlight is pension. So you know that women also, in most cases in the region, is that we still have voluntary schemes. So, and women who are in vulnerable employment cannot afford to make a contributions to this. So as a result, they have a lower pension. They have, even if for those who receive pensions, their pensions is way lower than what men receive. One also example is in Indonesia. Men are 3 to 4 times more likely to receive pension than women. So, and these are also a result of lifelong and multiple discriminations and disadvantages women face over their life course. So what we should do? Number one, we think it's very important that we look into social protection. We look at the life risks that women face across the life course. So how do we do that? So number one, we need to address that care, the burden of care is not only on women. It should be redistributed, it should be recognized, and it should also be also compensated. Like we have some schemes that offers, for example, care credits that also recognizes the roles of women in care work. Number two, we can also remove some of the conditionalities of conditional cash transfers that perpetuates gender inequality. And three, we need to remove gender bias in pension systems. So for example, there are some countries, I won't mention it, but the pension contribution is higher for women because women live longer. So it's not fair. So we have to address this gender bias in the pension system as well. And lastly, I think we need to up our investment for social protection that is gender sensitive. In the region, based on ADB report in 2019, the budget for men is 2.3% of the GDP, whereas for women it's only 1.9%. Sorry, 1.9%. So we really need to make sure that we have gender sensitive budget allocation as well for social protection to make sure that the majority of the workers, particularly women, would be protected. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aura, for this very informative intervention again. What stood out for me is the occupational hazards of women and working from home, especially also for children. Again, I remember in India, many women, they work from home and doing BD work, and that exposes also their children and other family workers to potential hazards. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed panelists and dedicated participants, as we draw to a close on this engaging and thought-provoking panel discussion, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to the presenters for their insightful contributions. Throughout our discussion, we have delved deep into the complex world of informal economy, recognizing its diversity and the individuals who make up this vital segment of our workforce. We have shed light on the importance of understanding the unique needs and vulnerabilities of informal workers and why it is imperative that we as a society take concrete actions to support and empower them. We have also recognized the significant impact of global events such as the COVID-19 pandemic, which have reshaped the landscape of informal work, highlighting the need for innovative and adaptable approaches. Our discussions have touched upon a wide range of topics, from policy interventions to improve job security and income stability, to the role of technology in extending financial services and social protection. We have learned about best practices and lessons from around the world, demonstrating that effective solutions are within our reach. Gender equality has been a central theme throughout our conversation. acknowledging that women often bear a disproportionate burden within the informal economy. We have discussed strategies for creating gender-responsive policies and interventions that can uplift women in this sector. Furthermore, we have emphasized the importance of social protection and formalization initiatives as key tools for reducing poverty and vulnerability among informal workers. These mechanisms provide essential support during crisis and pave the way for a more secure and dignified livelihood. In conclusion, our dialogue today has not only raised awareness about the challenges faced by informal economy workers, but has also provided us with valuable insights and a shared commitment to action. The resilience and ingenuity of informal workers in our region should inspire us to redouble our own efforts in addressing their needs and promoting inclusive growth. As we leave this session, let us carry forward the spirit of collaboration and determination that has characterized our discussion. Let us work together across sectors and borders to translate our insights into concrete policies and actions that can make a difference in the lives of informal workers. Remember that our work doesn't end here, it actually begins. Let us remain dedicated to the cause of social protection and economic inclusion, advocating for the rights and well-being of those who are often marginalized and overlooked. Thank you once again for your participation. And I would also like to thank the organizers for making this discussion possible. Thank you very much.
There's immigration of workers from the formal